Hi, welcome back to Focal Point. Got time for calls here in the last half hour, 888-589-8840. Here's the number to call if you'd like to join the program, 888-589-8840. Now, let me read some excerpts from this post by this fellow rancher in Nevada. Her name is Kina Lyle Gleckner. She says this: each rancher must sign this contract. That is a contract that have to do with terms and conditions that go on to list the allotment, the number and the kind of livestock to be grazed, when the permit begins and ends, the number of active and suspended AUMs, that's animal units per month. The terms and conditions list specific requirements, and every rancher must sign this contract agreeing to abide by the terms before he or she can even make a payment. So you sign this agreement with all these conditions and terms in it, and then you make the payment. So if you don't sign this agreement, you can't make a payment because you don't have a signed agreement that is in force. She says this: in the early 90s, the BLM went on a frenzy and drastically cut almost every rancher's permit because of this desert tortoise issue. Remember, these desert tortoises have been cohabiting with animals on that property for hundreds of years. We found out that the BLM euthanized hundreds of these guys. They had some kind of a shelter. They ran out of money, so they just killed them all. They euthanized all these desert tortoises. If they're such an endangered species, how in the world can you justify morally euthanizing hundreds of these if they are so endangered? They're not endangered at all. That's just an excuse to make this land grab. And she says this: all of us ranchers knew that cow and desert tortoise had coexisted for 100+ years. As an example, a family friend had his permit, this is grazing permits and so forth, cut by 90%. For those of you who are non-ranchers, that would be equated to getting your paycheck cut 90%. This is how these guys make their living. You cut 90% of his allowable use of forage, you've just cut his revenue by 90%. In 1976, there were approximately 52 ranching permittees in this area of Nevada. Presently, there are 3, from 52 to 3. Most of these people lost their livelihoods because of the actions of the BLM. Clive Bundy was one of these people who received extremely unfair and unreasonable terms and conditions. So they changed the terms, changed the conditions of the contract. It was unreasonable. It was unfair. And because it was so unfair and so unreasonable, he refused to sign the contract. And remember, he has to sign that thing before he's even permitted to pay. So he right now, because he hasn't signed this contract, he doesn't have a legal obligation to pay the BLM anything. Had Clive signed on the dotted line, he would have, in essence, signed his very livelihood away. And so Mr. Bundy took a stand not only for himself, but for all of us. He refused to be destroyed by a tyrannical federal entity and to have his American liberties and freedoms taken away. This is the very thing that Clive Bundy single-handedly took a stand against. Thank you, Clive, from a rancher who considers you a hero. Now let me read this. This is like you'll catch on right away. But here's a news release, breaking news, and you'll figure out what this is about. But it kind of puts everything kind of into perspective. Let me read this breaking news story to you. National Guard units seeking to confiscate a cache of recently banned assault weapons were ambushed by elements of a paramilitary extremist faction. Military and law enforcement sources estimate that 72 were killed and more than 200 injured before government forces were compelled to withdraw. Speaking after the clash, Massachusetts Governor Thomas Gage declared that the extremist faction, which was made up of local citizens, has links to the radical right-wing tax protest movement. Governor Gage blamed the extremists for recent incidents of vandalism directed against Internal Revenue offices. The governor, who described the group's organizers as criminals, issued an executive order authorizing the summary arrest of any individual who has interfered with the government's efforts to secure law and order. The military raid on the extremist arsenal at Concord, Massachusetts, followed widespread refusal by the local citizenry to turn over recently outlawed assault weapons. Gage issued a ban on military-style assault weapons and ammunition earlier in the week. This decision followed a meeting in early this month between government and military leaders at which the governor authorized the forcible confiscation of illegal arms. One government official, speaking on condition of anonymity, pointed out that none of these people would have been killed had the extremists obeyed the law and turned over their weapons voluntarily. Government troops initially succeeded in confiscating a large supply of outlawed weapons and ammunition. However, troops attempting to seize arms and ammunition in Lexington met with resistance from heavily armed extremists who had been tipped off regarding the government's plans. During a tense standoff in the Lexington Town Park, National Guard Colonel Francis Smith, commander of the government operation, ordered the armed group to surrender and return to their homes. The impasse was broken by a single shot, which was reportedly fired by one of the right-wing extremists. That's if the New York Times was doing a report on what happened at Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. Let's grab some phone calls. Let's go to Ricky, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Ricky, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, thank you, Brian. I wanted to make a couple of comments. That last call in the last hour, when you said, look, would you have a problem having homosexuals adopt little kids? He said, oh, no problem at all. Well, look, I was raised, and I'll speak with authority because I was raised in Sodom, AKS New Orleans. And I heard about, there's still sodomy on the books. It's against the law, which makes me proud of Louisiana. But you got to remember, New Orleans is a separate country from the rest of Louisiana. And the main purpose while sodomites, now I use the biblical term, the correct biblical term, the main reason why sodomites want to adopt little boys, now remember, I grew up in Sodom. I'm very aware of what sodomites do. The main reason they want to adopt little boys is to rape them and pervert them. That's a fact. If anybody denies that, they're a fool and they don't know what they're talking about. I realize talk show hosts, you got to be nice to people because you don't want to hurt their feelings, but I'm not in such guidelines, so I can tell it just like it is and not worry about nothing. The second comment I want to make is the BLM. When they stole this man's cattle, Mr. Bundy, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that the BLM said they would shoot anybody that tried to take their cows back. I mean, to me, that smacks of really, I hate to even say it, but Gestapo and Nazi tactics. Steal a man's property and then, threaten to shoot anybody that tries to take their property back. I mean, that's just totally out of hand, but I'll listen off here to everything else. And one other thing I want to say about Harry Reid is that it's a well-known fact he made his millions by forcing development, like buying real estate in Nevada, but telling people, well, we got to put a power line down here, so you all got to sell your property to the government, and then he puts in the development and makes millions. It's a well-known fact that's how Harry Reid made his millions, by forcing people off their property and buying it and turning it into development like this solar power thing.
Yeah. All right, Ricky, I appreciate that. And there are a number of hinky deals, hinky land deals in Harry Reid's past, very suspicious, I think flatly illegal. So if his son says, hey, people that broke the law to be prosecuted, then probably Nevada officials ought to start with Senator Harry Reid. But Ricky's right about the rate at which homosexuals molest children. It is 10 to 12 times higher than the rate among heterosexuals. Now, heterosexuals molest children, but the rate at which homosexuals molest children is at least 10 times the rate at which heterosexuals molest children. So it's an extremely vulnerable place for a child to be. Not only do children need a mom and a dad, but they need a safe place in which to grow up, and a same-sex household is not a safe place sexually for a young child. So Ricky's exactly right about that. Let's go to Peter, Huntsville, Texas. Peter, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, how are you doing, Brian?
Good. How are you?
Nice to talk to you again. I get in there once in a while. Sometimes getting hold of you is like contacting a pop station during a new car giveaway. But
Yeah. Well, glad you made it through.
anyway, I just had a thought. I was finishing up my income taxes a couple of days ago, and I noticed, first of all, I made $6,000 less in 13 than I did in 12, and I ended up paying $259 more tax, go figure. But as I got to the end of my TurboTax, and doing all the review there and everything like that, and before I was trying to sign off and print my documents, a little window popped up warning me that I was going to be in default because I didn't have Obamacare, and that I stood to pay a $268, I think it was, dollar fine next year.
Wow.
And I thought, how many salt of the earth American hardworking people have just been turned into outlaws, or at least been driven to civil disobedience by the fact that they can't afford this thing, is not a good value, it doesn't serve our needs. Anyway, I just thought I'd leave that in your hands. And the final comment I just wanted to make was it seems like the spirit of the Soviet Union has transferred itself here.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'll sign off the phone here and let you talk.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. And what he's talking about is, that fine goes into effect for people that are in the individual market. If you don't have insurance through your employer and you haven't gone out and gotten it on the individual market, then there's a fine that the IRS intends to collect from you, and the tax preparation software, like TurboTax or whatever, they're programmed to alert you to the fine, either that you have to pay this year or you have to pay next year. Matt Drudge is already paying his Obamacare penalty because he's self-employed. So he pays quarterly. He pays ahead of time. He's paying his taxes right now. He's making payments due by April 15 to take care of the tax load that he anticipates next year. And people have to do that. They got to anticipate their revenue for next year so that the federal government will know how much to fine them if they don't get themselves covered with Obamacare. And I think, and of course, the only way that Obama can collect those penalties is if you have money coming back. They can't put a lien on your property. The only thing they can do is withhold your tax refund. And I'm telling you, I think the government is scheming to find a way to keep every last refund that's due, not let it out of their grip. Focal Point AFR Talk.